Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. To briefly recall what I explained in the first video, the European Union is a supranational legal order consisting of 27 member states and comprising approximately 500 million people. The Union as it stands today gradually came into being, evolving from the original communities of 6 member states to the current Union of 27. In this second video, I shall focus predominantly on the origins of the European integration process. What brought the founding fathers of this European construct to relinquish part of their national sovereignty and transfer it to the European level? The answer is actually rather straightforward: a desire for peace and welfare in Europe. In this video, I will tell you about the Schuman Plan. I will tell you about the European Coal and Steel Community and the underlying idea of Jean Monnet that it is better to fight at a table than at the battlefield. But first things first. To fully comprehend all this, it is necessary to look back in time. The European continent has a long history of armed conflict. In the words of the President of the European Council, Mr. Herman Van Rompuy, the European continent bears the scars of spears and swords, cannons and guns, trenches and tanks. All this culminated in the 2 great wars of the last century, which involved almost all the world's great powers and had Europe as its main battlefield. Most contemporary accounts of European integration begin with World War II. This war was preceded by the Wall Street crash of 1929, which signaled the beginning of the Great Depression in the 30s and affected all Western industrialized countries. It led to economic recession, social hardship, and all this resulted in a climate of increasing nationalism in Germany, which ultimately ended in war. World War II created unprecedented havoc. It cost millions of lives and it left the European continent shattered. World War II was the deadliest conflict in human history. In the aftermath of the war, there was a widespread feeling that something needed to be done in order to prevent these atrocities from happening all over again. This war memorial, erected after World War I in Flanders Fields in Belgium, conveys this message loudly and clearly in 4 different languages. No more war, nie wieder Krieg, plus jamais de guerre, nooit meer oorlog. This would become the driving force behind European integration, Europe's first unofficial motto. Now, in the first post-war years, several forms of international cooperation were created all over the world, and all with the same overarching goal of bringing an end to divisions and war and creating welfare. To give some examples, in 1945 the United Nations was founded to maintain and promote international peace and security. 1 year later, in 1946, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade was signed to liberalize world trade. In 1948, the Organization for European Economic Cooperation, now the OECD, was set up with the main purpose of administrating the Marshall Fund, providing financial aid from the US to Europe. In 1949, on the onset of the Cold War, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the NATO, was created, a military alliance with the objective of keeping the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down, to cite its first Secretary General. And also in 1949, the Council of Europe was set up, a regional cooperation aiming to ensure respect for human rights, democracy and the rule of law. Its main realization, its main achievement would become the European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights. Besides the creation of the Council of Europe, also other forms of cooperation in political, economic and defense matters were formulated in Europe. Again, to give some examples, in 1946, in a speech in Zurich, the then British Prime Minister Churchill advocated the idea of a United States of Europe, led by France and Germany, with Britain on the sidelines. This idea of a united Europe never really caught on, however. A couple of years later, in 1950, the then French Prime Minister Leiden suggested the creation of a European defense community with a European army. This instead of rearming Germany under the auspices of the NATO. It was felt that if there was to be a European army, a common foreign policy would be necessary. In order to achieve that, plans for a European political community were drawn up. These, however, never really left the starting blocks, as the French Assembly, which remained wary about the German remilitarization, failed to ratify the Treaty on the European Defence Community. Also in 1950, the then French Minister for Foreign Affairs, Robert Schuman, proposed a plan to pool the Franco-German resources on coal and steel. This plan for economic integration would work. It would be the only one of the three that would be successful in the end. This is a clear indication of the fact that already from the beginning, the European integration process wasn't linearly a straightforward success. There have been setbacks and disappointments as well. Summarizing, in the first part of this video, we looked at the underlying motivation for European states to contemplate about collaboration at supranational level. And we identified the first tentative attempts towards this collaboration. In the second part of this video, we will focus on the European coal and steel community as the first real successful attempt at supranational cooperation.